Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host, here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I am going to share my review of the Land of Eem core rulebook from Exalted Funeral. This is written by James Parks and Ben Costa. This 256-page hardcover with PDF can be pre-ordered for an MSRP of $40. You can order the PDF alone for $15. And there is also a deluxe box set, which has the core rulebook, the bestiary, as well as the campaign book and some extra goodies. That does carry an MSRP of $150. The Land of Eem is slated to arrive in March. Having said all that, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got the core rulebook for Land of Eem. Couple of things I want to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, my friends over at Exalted Funeral were kind enough to provide me with a copy of the deluxe box set for Land of Eem. But neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. These days, it's important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a good feel for what you're going to find inside. All right, let's dive on in. First thing, I really appreciate the end papers. So we've got essentially our Game Master screen right here. And right here. So right at your fingertips. Definitely like that a lot. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a peek at the credits page because there were a lot of folks who worked very hard to bring this to life. Let's give credit where credit is due. You're going to notice Land of Eem is very colorful. So it really pops. And looking at the artwork as I'm flipping on through, you might think that this is a children's role-playing game, that this is an introductory role-playing game to bring the little ones into the hobby. No, it's not. I'm not saying that this isn't an all ages role-playing game. It is, but there is a lot more depth to Land of Eem than you might have expected just taking a look at the artwork. And I was pleasantly surprised and pleased to see that. Funny enough, Land of Eem uses a lot of mechanics and a lot of concepts from a lot of other role-playing games. So this is kind of a mashup of various different mechanics and approaches. And I got to say, all in all, they work very nicely together. So one of the first things to point out is, as far as like action resolution, very much like the Apocalypse engine. So rather than rolling 2 6-sided dice, you roll a 12-sided die. And on a 1 or 2, it's a complete failure or a critical failure, if you want to consider it that. On a 3 to 5, it's a failure with a plus. So something positive has come out of that failure. A 6 to 8 is a success with a twist. So you've got a complication there. 4 to 11 is a success. And then 12 or higher is a complete success. And as far as your die roll, you're going to have a modifier from the skill that you're using. And you can also have modifiers that the game master will assign. And it could be positive, it could be negative. The highest modifier you can get is a +3, and the lowest is a -3. Now, as far as the characters themselves, you're going to have 4 key attributes. We've got Vim, Vigor, Knack, and Know-how. And each of those is going to have 4 skills underneath them. And the skills are very, very broad. So as far as character creation, you're not going to see a range of 3 to 18 for your attributes. All we worry about here are the modifiers. So you're going to have a +2, a +1, a 0, and a -1 that you'll assign to your 4 attributes. Now, we also have some derived stats from those attributes. So we have courage, we have dread, we have your attack, your defense, and we do not have hit points. So we have courage, and that's kind of your fighting spirit. So dread is what gets deducted from your courage. So in combat, you have dread. And if your adversary happens to hit, then they're going to cause dread, and you're going to subtract that from your courage. So if you're at 0 courage, it means you're defeated. Now, does that mean you're injured, or you've lost the will to fight, or maybe you've been knocked unconscious? That's going to be up to the players and the game master. So I like that quite a bit. I thought that was kind of cool as far as the overall style of the game, because as far as combat goes, the initiative is lifted right out of Doctor Who, the role-playing game. So talkers will go first, and then doers will go second, and then those who are running away are going to go third, and then those characters who are going to engage in combat are going to go last in the initiative order. And then, interestingly enough, in combat itself, we go back towards a more kind of traditional take your actions, rolling to hit, and things like that. So I thought that was, kind of interesting, although some people may not like that. Some people may not like the talkers, doers, fleers, and combatants, because for a Doctor Who role-playing game where the Doctor and his or her companions never resort to violence unless it's an absolute last resort, something like that as far as initiative makes sense. In a fantasy role-playing setting, maybe not so much. But I don't mind it. I think it's cool. I'm fine with it. But it's important to note that, once again, that's another one of the mechanics from another role-playing game, which is mashed up in Land of Eem. Thought that was pretty wild, because I had not seen that sort of initiative in any other game but Doctor Who, the role-playing game. So we'll have all of our different species here. One thing that's really cool about Land of Eem is it's not just our typical high fantasy sort of setting. Sadly, you're not going to get a hell of a lot of setting information in the core book. I would have liked to have seen more of that, but there's just little bits and pieces. Of course, the campaign book is absolutely overflowing with information and adventuring content and things like that. But the core book itself, you're not going to learn a whole heck of a lot about the land itself outside of some of the different species and some of the different classes. So as far as the various different races you can choose from, many of these are brand new. These are not your typical fantasy races. We don't have our dwarves. We don't have our elves. We do have gnomes. And funny enough, gnomes are the only race and class in this game, and they're the only ones who use traditional magic. So that's kind of cool right there too. But we've got our classes, and once again, we have some classes that are pretty traditional, like the rogue. And then we have others which are completely different, such as the best pal. I know that's not the name of it. I think it's favored chum or something like that. Now, here are the core regions of the Land of Eem, which is part of your background. So where is your character from? You also will find that there's a good amount of old school sensibilities to Land of Eem too. So we've got a lot of random tables which are going to promote emergent play. And I thought that was very cool. I will say the crafting section, I think, is just a little too in depth. Maybe it's just me, but I know in video games, I enjoy crafting. I know a lot of folks really love crafting in video games. As far as tabletop role-playing games, it's never as interesting in execution as it seems it will. So we've got all of these pages devoted to different components and things that you can make. And I'm not saying that this is bad by any stretch. I just think that maybe there's just a little too much page space devoted to it. Some of that page space could have been devoted to learning more about the setting itself, because this book is available separately. And to me, as a separate core rule book, I think it's important that we get more information about the game world for the players and the game masters. Exploration is a big deal with Land of Eem. And when I say exploration, I'm not talking about just dungeon delving. I'm talking about actually traveling to different lands. So here we've got our combat. And as I mentioned, there is some depth to Land of Eem that I was not expecting just at first glance. Combat is one of those. Now, it is relatively abstract, but we've got critical hits. We've got, as an example here, in melee and ranged combat, we have that same sort of apocalypse engine approach. Critical miss, miss with a plus, hit with a counterattack, hit, critical hit for melee, ranged combat. I thought that was pretty cool. We've got the various different conditions that the characters can have. We have a little bit of information about some downtime activities, not a ton, but it is addressed. We do have a little section on that. We have a good-sized bestiary. And something I really like about the bestiary here is it's focused on things the game master needs to know about these adversaries. What are its abilities? What are its vulnerabilities? What does it do? Right? So here we've got the ink pot spider, which that shows that it's a monster. It's not an animal. So we've got our abilities: web trap, web spurt, vulnerability. It is vulnerable to Starfell made weapons that inflict +2 dread. Now, as far as dread, which is essentially the damage you do, it doesn't depend on your equipment. It depends on the character class. So you might have a character class where it's 1 to 8 dread. So I like that too, where it's more important what is the character as opposed to what is the character carrying. Now, of course, there's equipment that's going to give you bonuses to that, but I do like the fact that the amount of damage and your courage is going to be mainly based on the class you have. So as you can see, a lot of entries in this bestiary. I should point out that there is redundancy between the bestiary that's in this core rulebook and the separate bestiary. Then we got our game master section, and I gotta say, I really like this information. There's some really good advice in here. Then we start getting into a bunch of random tables. As I had mentioned, there is a real old school vibe to the proceedings here, and there is a real aim at emergent play as opposed to heavily plotted linear adventuring. Not to say that you won't have plotted adventures, and adventures aren't necessarily going to be linear in nature, but I do like the fact that we've got all of these various different random tables. Then we're going to wrap up with a really short little adventure, which I had to laugh. It involves the player characters clearing out rats from the basement of the tavern. And I know it's done kind of with a wink and a nod, so I like that quite a bit. Very nicely presented. I thought that's really, really well done. All right, so here is the Land of Eem graphic novels Dungeoneer Adventures and Rickety Stitch. Very cool. So that is a peek inside the core rulebook for Land of Eem from Exalted Funeral. Let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. I think by this point in the review, you can tell just by my attitude, I like Land of Eem. I gotta say, I was very pleasantly surprised because I was one of those people who thought, oh yeah, this is an introductory role-playing game. This is one of those role-playing games that you use to get the little ones, not the real little ones, but the youngins introduced to the hobby. And of course, you can certainly use Land of Eem for that. But this is an all ages role-playing game. And as I started off the review, there is a surprising amount of depth to this role-playing game as well. I thought it was really wild to see such a mashup of all of these various different mechanics and attitudes from other role-playing games. And they work really nicely mashed up together. So there is that. I will point out that this is not your traditional high fantasy sort of setting, and I like that a lot. Now, you might recall I recently reviewed The Magical Land of Yeld, which I really liked a ton, and that is also kind of an all ages sort of fantasy role-playing game with a very unique setting and a very unique premise where all of the player characters are kids trapped in a magic land. Land of Eem is along those same lines. It is something very unique. We don't have our typical dwarves and elves and halflings. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I love the fact that we've got all of these unique classes, but then we also have our tried and true classes. We've got some very unique species to choose from. And then we have some that we're pretty familiar with, like humans and goblins. I'll tell you what, though, I would have liked to have seen a lot more information about the setting itself in this core rulebook. The reason why is because a lot of people are going to pick up just the core rulebook to check this out. They're not necessarily going to dive on in and get that deluxe box set. At the end of the day, reading through the core rulebook, they're not going to know a ton about the Land of Eem. So I would have liked to have seen more page space devoted to that, maybe trimmed out some of the bestiary, maybe trimmed out a bit of that crafting page count. Also, should point out that some people may not care for that Doctor Who, the role-playing game conflict initiative, where the talkers go first, the doers go second, the fleers go third, and the combatants go last. I mean, in a role-playing game built on Doctor Who stories, yeah, of course, that's a given. With a role-playing game that's kind of going for a fantasy vibe, an epic fantasy vibe, maybe not. But I will say I can easily see people just discarding that and just going with an initiative system where you're, rolling your die to see who's going first, things like that. So it's not a big deal. All in all, I really like Land of Eem a ton. I could see having an absolute blast playing this. I love the fact that it does have that surprising depth, that it's not just all abstracted. I really dig how there's a bit of an old school mentality to the proceedings here as well, and that there is a focus on driving the narrative and emergent play. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give the Land of Eem core rulebook a 9 out of 10. I certainly recommend it. And don't be fooled into thinking that this is just a kid's role-playing game, because it is not. All right, that is it for this time out. If you liked the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell, because it'll not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit gaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thank you very much for watching. And until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.